This screencast is going to show you how to convert between fractions and decimals. So let's go ahead and take a look at our different methods. Our first method that we could use is a pretty simple method for converting from a fraction to a decimal, and that's when we're going to look at a fraction and ask ourselves, can we change the denominator or the bottom number to a 10, 100, or 1000. So we want to see if the denominator is a factor of 10, 100, or 1000. So if you look at our first example, these examples obviously are factors of those three numbers. We can change them into those three numbers just so we can get some practice with that. So if we take a look at 3/5, you'll notice that we have a 5 in our denominator. Some of the numbers are going to be obvious to notice that you can change them to a 10 or 100 or 1000. So we can change a 5 into a 10. So I'm going to just go ahead and rewrite my new denominator. So I have a denominator of 10 now. And I have to think about, how did I go from 5 to 10? Well, I multiplied by 2. Remember, when we're finding our equivalent fractions, we have to multiply the top and the bottom by the same number. So then my new numerator would be a 6. Remember, I'm going from fraction to decimal, so I still need to change this into a decimal. So if I look, I now have 6/10. I need to think about my place value. I drew a little quick place value chart at the bottom, so remember it's tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So if I'm saying 6/10, I'm going to draw my 0, put my decimal, and then I'm just going to put a 6 right after the decimal point, and 3/5 would be equal to the decimal of 6/10, or 0.6. Let's take a look at our second example. We have 11/20. I can't simplify this down to a 10 because I can't divide anything into 11, but I can change the 20 into 100. So you can see that on the screen. Then I go 20 times what gets me to 100? Well, that would be 20 times 5, so I have to multiply 11 times 5. That's going to get me 55. But this is still a fraction. I have to change it into a decimal. So I know that because I have 55 hundredths, it's going to be 0 point something. Well, now I'm looking at my hundredths place. Our rule is that the last number of our numerator needs to end up in that place. So I'm going to go over 2 spaces, and I'm just going to fill in 55. So 55 hundredths looks like 0.55. Let's go ahead and take a look at our second method. Our second method is using division. And this is going to be very important that you look at the picture that I'm currently outlining in green. You'll notice that I have a sample fraction, numerator over denominator, and then I'm showing you how you would put that into a long division problem. So your numerator always goes inside and your denominator stays on the outside. So I'm going to go ahead and get that set up down here with our first example of 7/8. So you'll see that I put the 7 on the inside because the numerator always goes on the inside and the 8 goes on the outside. And then you ask yourself, can 8 go into 7? And our answer is going to be no, because 7 is smaller than 8. This is where we start to create our decimal. I need to add a decimal point after the 7, and I need to add a 0. I like to think of the decimal point and the 0 as best friends. If you add a decimal point, you add a 0. Then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring the decimal point up into my answer, because my answer is going to be up here. And then I'm going to go back to my 8 and ask the same question, can 8 go into 70? Yes, it can. How many times can 8 go into 70? Well, 8 can go into 70 8 times. 8 times 8 is 64. I'm going to subtract. 70 minus 64 is 6. And then I'm going to keep going. So 8 cannot go into 6, so I'm going to add another 0. Bring down my 0, and now I have 60. How many times can 8 go into 60? It can go in 7 times. 7 times 8 is 56. Subtract, I get a 4. I'm going to add another 0 because I haven't run out of numbers yet, and I'm going to bring that down to make 40. So then I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to say, how many times can 8 go into 40? Well, that's answer is 5, because 5 times 8 is 40. I'm going to subtract, and I have a remainder of 0. So now I know that I'm done, and I have my final answer. So 7/8 is equal to 0.875 as a decimal, and this would be using your division method. Let's take a look at one more example for division. Let's look at 1/6. I'm going to go ahead and get my division problem set up, and then we'll go ahead and walk through the problem. it's really important that you make sure that you're putting the numerator inside of the division sign and the denominator outside. I know it looks weird, you're used to putting the bigger number inside, but this is the only way that you're going to be successful. Think about the fact that you're working with a fraction, and a fraction is smaller than one whole. So that should indicate that your decimal is going to be smaller than 1 point something. So let's go ahead and go through our steps. So 6 cannot go into 1, so I need to add a decimal and a 0. I'm going to bring my decimal point up into my answer. If it helps you, you can put a 0 above whatever number is there because you're not going to have anything going in there in that space, and it just kind of helps you remember where to place your numbers. So 6 can go into 10. 6 can go into 10 one time. 1 times 6 is 6. Subtract to get a 4. I'm going to add a 0, bring down my 0. 6 can go into 40 6 times. 6 times 6 is 36. I'm going to subtract, and I get another 4. Bring down my 0. I now have 40 again, so I know this is another 6. 6 times 6 is 36. Subtract, I get another 4. You'll notice we're starting to see a pattern here. That tells me that this decimal up here is actually going to be what we call a repeating decimal. So my final answer could look like this: 0.16 repeating, 0.166. Make sure you're just putting the repeating line above the 6's though, because that's the only thing that repeats in this decimal. So 1/6 is equal to 0.16 repeating. The third method that you might be able to use is a calculator, and we just want to make sure that you understand how to use this as well. So on your calculator, here are your steps, and you're going to try these 3 problems. So the first thing you're going to do is type in your fraction or decimal. So if you type in 6/9 on your calculator, you're going to hit enter down here at the bottom, and then you're going to press the F to D key. The F to D key is right here above where it says Op 1, and that key is going to become very useful, especially when you're trying to convert between fractions and decimals, because it makes it super easy. So once you hit that F to D key, a decimal should pop up on your screen, and you should get 0.6666 the whole way over, which would tell you that your answer would be 0.6 repeating. So that'll be your answer for number 1. Go ahead and try number 2 and 3, and then once you think you have your answer, hit play and check yours with mine. So you'll see that we should get 0.83 with the 3 repeating, and then our decimal converts to 7/8. So just a shortcut to use on the calculator. And the final part that we're going to look at today is looking at converting from decimals to fractions. And basically when you're converting from decimals to fractions, it's pretty easy because all you're doing is using your place value. So if you can say the decimal, you should be able to write the fraction. So the main thing that you want to remember is your place value terms. For example, this 6 is in the tenths place, so we would say 6/10. When I go to write that, I'm literally going to write 6 over 10, or 6/10. You want to make sure that if you can, you are simplifying. So 6/10 should not be my final answer because I can divide this to make it into a smaller numbered fraction. It's still equal but smaller. So I can divide by 2 and I would get 3/5. This would be my final answer for my decimal equivalent of 0.6. If I look at my second example, I have 0.87. If I'm looking here, the 7 is in the hundredths place, so this will be set as 87 hundredths. So I would go ahead and write that as 87 over 100. I can't simplify this, so that would be my final answer of 87 over 100. And then the final example that I threw on here, I just wanted to talk about the fact that we now have a whole number. So think about our fractions that we use or we write using whole numbers, which are called mixed numbers. So don't be thrown off by this. This is 3.3, or 3, our decimal point stands for the word and. So it would be 3 and 3/10. So we would write our big number 3 and then our little 3/10. 3/10 is in simplest form. So 3.3 is actually 3 and 3/10. This is just written as a mixed number. So just to review, converting between fractions and decimals, if you're going from a fraction to a decimal, you have 3 methods you can use. If you're going from a decimal to a fraction, you're basically going to say the decimal and then write the fraction and simplify if possible. Make sure that you're always simplifying if you can to get the final answer for any problem.